6th of June, 1944. A German Panzer IV idles under orchard trees, engine clattering. The loader passes a shell, armor-piercing, capped, across to the gunner. Ahead, dust hangs over the Sword Juno Gap and the road to Caen. To their right, the Orne crossings are a knot of smoke and tracer. Then a new sound rolls across the fields. Hundreds of wooden wings hissing from the northeast. Gliders, low and implacable, pour into the British bridgehead. The driver mutters that the sky itself is landing. The company commander, radio pressed to his ear, weighs fuel, daylight, and what little he knows of friendly units. The order is cautious. Push forward, feel for the flank, avoid naval guns. Minutes later, the lead platoon is in the open, and the first salvo arrives from offshore. Heavy shells that turn hedgerows into geysers. A kilometer farther, the column finds a seam between British and Canadian sectors and sniffs the sea air near Lyon-sur-Mer. They have reached the channel, then realize they are alone. With no Luftwaffe umbrella and no clear link to artillery, they back out at dusk, the gliders still whispering to the east. They believed armor could restore a broken line if unleashed quickly. What happened instead was a timing war they could not win. The German side had teeth, Panzer IVs, Panthers, 88s, crews drilled to fight short, fast engagements. But their system, release authority, signaling, fuel allocation, road movement under hostile air, was brittle on the one day it most needed to be supple. By the time key armored formations moved, the Allied machine had already rearranged the battlefield with air, radios, and an iron logistics schedule. System versus spirit is the frame. German courage and local skill could strike, but the Allied system multiplied small wins into irreversible momentum. Hitler's late afternoon release of Major Panzer Reserves, 12th SS and Panzer Lehr came after the window for a decisive shoreline counterblow had narrowed. Normandy mattered because it fused strategic deception, sea control, and air supremacy into one theater where armor's value depended on timing and route density. From Calais to the Seine, the Allied transportation plan had already bent rails and choked yards. Fuel drums and replacement tracks for German panzers sat behind broken bridges, while reconnaissance jabos loitered for columns that moved by day. Every hour after dawn, 6th June tightened the Allied grip on ports, exits, and artillery positions. And around Caen, nearest the beaches and the best road net, German armor faced a fight it did not choose. Urban edges, hedge-bound villages, and naval guns that could retarget in minutes. Yet the terrain also offered the Germans a chance. In the orchards and sunken lanes, a single company could ambush, disengage, and sting again. The contest was set. German armor trading space for local shocks. The Allies trading time for mass. Before dawn, 6th June, German commanders believed the main blow would fall elsewhere. The Pas-de-Calais held their fear and therefore their armor. Operation Fortitude's radio nets, dummy formations, and double agents fed that fear until even the sound of real guns off Normandy looked like a feint. Operationally, the reserve question split the German high command. Rommel wanted panzer divisions close enough to hit the beaches before Allied mass could build. Rundstedt preferred a deeper armored reserve to strike the lodgment after committing Allied armor inland. Hitler's compromise, scattering partial control and keeping the strongest reserves under OKW, was logical in theory and ruinous in practice. On the morning the decision mattered, release authority lagged behind events, and German armored units waited for clarity that did not come. The Allied system matched ships, aircraft, radios, and pre-planned logistics with ruthless precision. Destroyers and cruisers could deliver battery-accurate fire on grid calls. Fighter-bombers owned the daytime roads, guided by forward controllers on beaches and in hedgerows. Radar tracked inbound Luftwaffe raids. Ground controllers vectored interceptions. The transportation plan had smashed key rail nodes in the months before 6th of June, starving German countermoves of speed. On D-Day itself, roughly 11,592 14,674 Allied sorties flew in layers, from heavy bombers to tactical fighters, against 400 Luftwaffe missions in the sector. The math of dominance was simple. Interdicted routes, plus secure beachhead radios, plus naval gunfire, plus air cover, Hochters shrinking. German decision space per hour. The first contact worth dissecting is the 21st Panzer Division's counterattack, a textbook test of German armored reflex. The division had 124-127 Panzer IV available and sat nearest to the beaches, but its commander was out of the area early in the day. The division had elements dispersed to support coastal defenses, and orders were late and conflicting. In the early evening, 2 thrusts went in. East of the Orne, Major Hans von Luck's battalion drove into the British airborne bridgehead and hit a fortified screen of anti-tank guns and mortars, then 8 naval shells and airstrikes. West of the Orne, grenadiers and tanks probed the Sword Juno seam and, in one startling push, reached the coast near Lyon-sur-Mer. The penetration was narrow, under-supported, and exposed to flanking fire. As British gliders of Operation Mallard landed nearby and dusk deepened, the unit withdrew to avoid being cut off. The division reported serious tank losses, variously estimated 30 to 50 on the day, and precious fuel burned with no decisive effect. What mattered most was tempo. Even a brave lunge that touched the sea could not survive without artillery netting, air cover, and neighboring formations moving in concert. The next 36 hours shifted from local counterattacks to a broader contest around Caen. On 7 through 8 June, 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, young, indoctrinated, and backed by veteran cadre, hit Canadian positions at Puteaux-en-Bessin and around Bretteville. At dawn, assaults, company-sized elements tried to crack villages held by infantry with attached anti-tank guns and quick-on-the-net field artillery. Initial penetrations occurred. Prisoners were taken. Some Canadian subunits were briefly overrun, but by nightfall, the division had paid heavily for frontal pressure against covered arcs and called fire. Panthers struggled in tight lanes. Panzer IVs sought defilade only to be pinned by tank destroyer ambushes and artillery concentrations. The result was a stalemate of high intensity. German tactical aggression meeting a lattice of Allied battalion guns and brigade-level radios. Despite notable grit, German gains around the villages did not roll the beachhead back. Their armor was present, but the system around it, route security, ammo resupply, coordination with core artillery, was frayed. The turning point, if you map decisions to effects, came on 10th June at Le Caen. That afternoon, RAF Mitchells and Typhoons struck the newly established headquarters of Panzergruppe West. The raid killed around 18 staff officers, including the Chief of Staff. Wounded Geyer von Schweppenberg, shredded communications vans, and collapsed the only German Army HQ in the theater, able to coordinate multiple panzer divisions for a counteroffensive. Command functions shifted to ISS Panzer Corps on an interim basis. Panzergruppe West retired to Paris and did not return to operations until roughly 28 June. In a campaign where minutes mattered, this single strike erased weeks of staff work, and with it, the institutional memory needed to choreograph a theater-wide armored blow. From the German perspective, this was a guillotine to the neck of initiative. German logistics and production realities compounded the damage. Panzer Lehr, the showpiece formation with abundant SPW half-tracks and a strong panzer regiment, moved under skies the Allies owned. Its textbook kit could not offset exposure on the march, bridges downed by the transportation plan, and the need to hide by day, surge by night, and still meet fuel points that might not exist by morning. Across the theater, German armored forces in Normandy ultimately lost on the order of 1,500 AFVs out of 2,336 sent, with at least half attributed not to direct fire but to breakdowns, fuel starvation, and vehicles abandoned when recovery was impossible. That statistic reveals the shape of the struggle. The Allied system did not merely kill tanks, it made the act of being a tank in Normandy progressively unsustainable. Intelligence and command control advantages decided when and where German armor would bleed. British and American code-breaking, traffic analysis, and direction-finding exposed nodes rather than just units in motion. Lecane's discovery was not luck. It was a chain, from wireless intercepts to Huff-Duff fixes to photo confirmation to a timed strike package. Naval and ground radars brought forewarning and control. Air-ground radios magnified every battalion's artillery. German reports lamented air attack more than they proved air-to-tank kill counts. But even conservative reads show that Allied aircraft smothered movement and forced German armor to fight with poor synchronization. After 10th of June, with Panzergruppe West gutted, German armored divisions faced not only a stronger enemy, but a smarter one. On the human capital side, the gap widened daily. German panzer crews still showed excellent gunnery and fieldcraft, but training pipelines had shortened. Many new Waffen SS crews in 12th SS had fewer hours in full crew coordination than their instructors had in 1941-42. Allied crews, by contrast, often arrived with standardized radio procedures, practiced troop-to-troop drills, and a chain of forward observers who could put shells within minutes onto any hedge suspected of housing an 88. Flight hours mattered too. Luftflotte 3 could not sustain large-scale daylight cover in the beachhead. Hundreds of Allied cap and fighter-bomber sorties versus only 300-400. German sorties on D-Day, and that imbalance meant German armored columns seldom enjoyed a quiet march. The score was not just who had better tanks, but who had more repetitions per skill, per day, tactically. The Allies refused the fight the Germans wanted. Open-field gunnery duels at long range where an 88 or Panther could dominate. Instead, they pinned German armor to towns and hedgerows, used artillery to break up assembly areas, and called for naval fire the moment tanks silhouetted on a ridge. They accepted localized mauling to keep the rhythm favorable, retain the lodgment, widen the exits, keep the roads unsafe for German units after sunrise. When German counterattacks formed, the Allies bled them with air and guns before armor met armor. Doctrine favored combined arms over singular heroics. The system won by applying 1,000 small suffocations rather than one cinematic blow. Nuance matters. German armor was not a blunt instrument. On 13th of June at Villers-Bocage, a handful of Tigers, most famously under Michael Wittmann, shocked a British column, destroyed numerous vehicles, and forced a pullback. Around Caen in late June, Operation Epsom, German counterattacks by 2nd SS Panzer Corps imposed heavy costs and checked Allied advances, at least temporarily. Local German gunnery and ambush. Skill remained dangerous throughout June-July. Claims of Typhoon rockets alone destroying armor at extravagant ratios are not supported by post-battle counts. Much of the damage came from artillery, AT guns, and mechanical attrition, but the cumulative effect of air power was decisive in denying movement. Daylight massing and steady resupply. Roll the numbers. On the 6th of June, Allied air activity tallied roughly 11,590, 14,674 sorties versus 300-400 by the Luftwaffe. Naval guns added thousands of rounds in direct support, range-dependent per ship, and Allied ground forces put 156,000 men ashore in the first 24 hours. German armor near Caen included 103, 24, 127 Panzer IV in 21st Panzer, 150, 180 tanks in 12th SS, and 208 tanks, assault guns, plus 31 Panzer IV in Panzer. On paper, a potent reserve. In practice, a reserve gated by OKW release and bombed roads. The La Caine strike removed theater-level armored coordination from 10 to 28 June. From June-August, German AFV losses in Normandy landed around 2,500 out of 2,336 committed, 50% non-combat causes. The math of dominance is not one ratio. It is the overlap of sorties, shells, fuel tonnage, and repair cycles per day, where the Allied curve steepened while the German curve flattened. Psychologically, German records show a slide from confidence to grim fatalism. Early entries speak of throwing the enemy into the sea. By 10 June, staff talk shifts to holding the shoulder and winning time. The RAF raid erased a headquarters, but also a sense of orchestration. After La Caine, division staffs complained of flying orders, contradictory priorities, and a growing fatigue as night movement became the only safe means to reposition. Reports from armored units mention drivers falling asleep at halts, maintenance platoons stripping donor vehicles for parts, and junior commanders improvising under radio silence to avoid drawing jabos. The diary tone changes from aggressive verbs to defensive ones. Consolidate, withdraw, dig in, counter by company. In the following weeks, the ripples were clear. The battles for Caen dragged on with ferocity, but the initiative never truly returned to the Germans. Rommel and Rundstedt, arguing for realistic options, were sidelined. Geyer von Schweppenburg was removed from his post. Von Kluge would later push for withdrawal. When U.S. forces finally tore a hole at St. Lo and launched Operation Cobra in late July, Panzer Lehr, already bled by weeks of attrition, was shattered under concentrated bombing. The German armored arm in the West did not collapse in a day. It eroded until one more shock cracked the line. Civilian costs and POW treatment bracket the story. Normandy's villages paid a steep price in bombardment and crossfire. War crimes by elements of the 12th SS against Canadian POWs are documented and condemned. German civilians were largely absent from this front, but French civilians were not. The figures vary by source, yet they remind us that tonnage and tempo had human shadows. Families displaced, towns flattened, wounded in barns turned aid stations. This perspective centers soldiers and machines, but does not ignore those caught between them. Post-war doctrine digested these days into lessons. For Germany's few surviving armored leaders, the verdict stressed unity of command, protected communications, and the impossibility of armored decision under hostile air when fuel and repair capacity are fragile. For Allied armies, Normandy validated radio-centric combined arms, forward air control, interdiction against rail, road nodes, and relentless logistics. Training reforms after the war doubled down on crew coordination and battle captainship, not just gunnery. Technical diffusion followed. Better tank radios as standard, stabilized guns for snapshots, artillery nets wired to maneuver battalions, and air-ground procedures that later NATO would treat as muscle memory. Return to our opening image. The orchard near Perrier's Ridge. The engines rattle. The gliders sliding down like a quiet avalanche. The German tank crew did not lack courage. They lacked a theater-level clock that ticked in their favor. On D-Day through 10th of June, armor from the German side fought hard, sometimes brilliantly, but inside a shrinking envelope shaped by Allied system power. The metaphor is simple. Spirit is a blade. A system is the hand, wrist, and stance behind it. In Normandy, the German blade was sharp. The Allied stance was stronger.